Welcome to Unleash the Power, IBM and Beyond, the podcast where we dig into automation, security, modernization, and what's next for the IBM and beyond. Today in episode 2, we're tackling IBM storage best practices and how to detect early growth, understand what's driving it, and then talking about how to build repeatable cleanup routines with the right thresholds and alerts. IBM storage issues don't usually show up as a big red alert. They start as small changes no one notices, until backups run long, performances dip, or you suddenly are fighting a disk emergency. My guest today brings great perspective on this topic because he's seen both sides in the real world. And that guest I'm referring to today is Bob Butcher, one of my counterparts here at Fortra on the Solution Engineers team. Bob, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to have you. When I was putting together this episode, I really wanted to make sure we brought in someone with real-world experience and a practical point of view and has dealt with this in real-life firsthand challenges, right? And understanding what it looks like beyond just the talking points. So naturally, you were the first person that came to mind because of the conversations we've had together, and then also in the past with customers that we've been dealing with. So before I get into this topic itself, I want to get into some of the questions that I have for you. Why don't you give a little bit of a background on you from the standpoint of where you came from?
Okay. Hey, Greg, thanks for having me today. Yeah, a little bit about myself. Prior to joining the Fortra team, I had a chance to work for a couple managed service providers. And prior to that, I was actually a system administrator. And one of the things that I've got 30 years on the box on the IBM platform. One of the things that we're going to talk about today is actually something that a lot of people don't think about, which is storage stuff. So one of the products when I came over to Fortra was a product that I never used. Now, I was a customer of Fortra, and I've used a lot of the products like Robot Schedule, Robot HA, as well as the PowerTech security products. But one thing that I'm really excited about with what we're going to talk about today is Fortra has a product called Robot Space. And a lot of these things that we're going to talk about today, Robot Space can address those issues.
Perfect, Bob. That's exactly what this conversation I think is going to be very, very powerful to customers, and we'll talk about this later in the podcast as well. Is some of the other resources that we have as well to sort of feed off of this conversation here today from a webinar that we did. So I'll give a little bit more information about that a little bit later, but. Let's jump into some of those questions and that I have for you here, Bob, if that's okay, and then we can go from there.
Sure.
All right. So you've been on the MSP side, you've been on the customer side. What did it teach you about how storage problems really happen in the real world?
Well, yesterday was a perfect example, right? You and I are on a call with a customer, and they're talking about, hey, I was using 13% of disk, and my disk percentage is at 13%. And all of a sudden the next day I've got that dreaded CPF 0907 serious storage condition may exist. It's the one thing that, as a system administrator, I used to dread because now that, that you've got an issue. So to answer your question, I think the world is really, you're either in one or the other. You're either in react mode or proact mode. I think a lot of the people today don't think about these things, these storage issues, and they're more in a react mode. So I was the same way when I was a system admin for some of the systems that I had to maintain. I mean, I'm busy. I'm off doing other things, and I'm in a react mode. So when serious storage condition may exist type messages pop up, I'm dropping everything and I'm trying to fix it. Okay. I don't really think that's a great way of of handling things, in my opinion. And I wish more people would be in a proact type of mode. So when I was in the MSP arena and I had customers jump on and they needed help, once we had fixed the issues, we started pushing them to how can we be more proactive with a lot of the things on the box, so we don't have to jump through hoops when we have an issue. So I would say, to answer that question, um, most of the customers that I see are react mode when they should really be thinking about how it can be in proact mode.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that around like setting up thresholds and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I would do, is I would always be looking at my disk percentage, every day, right? And things like that, because, if all of a sudden you see a big jump in something, kind of where you're at. So I was always on the system looking at those things, and I had written my own code. I mean, I had to maintain the code, right? I had to maintain this, that, whatever, and emails and things like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I was doing some proactive stuff manually to check on these things, to
Hmm.
keep me out of that reactive mode.
Perfect. Perfect. Nice. Nice. Um, Next question. Why do IBMI storage issues rarely start as big problems? What are, I'll say, what are some of the early warning signs that, teams might miss that they could sort of focus on?
So one of the things, this was actually a great question, and it brought me back to trying to think about what I did as a system admin. I think of it as, I just bought a new house. I got a 2-car garage. I got both cars in the garage, and then all of a sudden, years later, you've got your son's going to go off to college, and you realize, geez, I don't park in the garage because I got so much clutter and this and that. I think about when I heard this question, I thought about, I used to migrate to new boxes probably once every 5 years. And when you go to the new boxes, most of the time you're going to add more disk, right? You're going to have more
Hmm.
disk to play around with. You're going to have faster machines and this and that. You don't think about it, right? Because everything, it's shiny, it's new, and to me, the biggest thing is you really need to have a standard. You need to have rules in place. I'll give you an idea. Prior to using the Fortran products for security, PowerTech, I got thrown into this role and we failed this audit. And then finally, I realized why audits are important, right? We had to standardize the way we do things. What are we looking at? What are we checking? What are we locking down? I never did that with storage. I just let people kind of go off and do their own thing. When you get a new box in, people are off and running and whatever. And one of the things that we did that really helped me prevent that is we created standards. So, like, for example, when users would leave, let's say they retired or moved to another department or whatever, you start thinking about, well, what can I standardize? Okay, I can disable a user profile, but maybe I can then start looking at the size of their libraries. What do they own? Things like that. When I started thinking that way, I started realizing if I create standards from the store from looking at the storage, when I start maybe quarterly looking at, are there files that maybe I can reorg? Are there old objects out there on a quarterly basis that maybe aren't being used anymore? For people that have left the company, do they need all of this data in the libraries they used to own? When I started thinking that way and I started putting standards into place for storage, I started having cleaner systems. I didn't, bring in this brand new system and let people run wild and do whatever. And I managed it better. So it wasn't like
Yeah.
hey, I just bought a new house, got a 2-car garage, and 5 years later, hey, we're not using the garage to park in, because everybody else is using it for everything else. So the standards, I think, was an important rule that I put into place as a system admin that really helped me down the road and in the future.
Yeah, definitely. So with those standards, did they also probably help with compliance and regulatory too, right? Because now you can put standards in place saying if you're copying libraries or copying IFS directories or files, that you're copying that data and within compliance and regulatory.
Yeah, yeah, you nailed it. So now that I see what's going on, now it's like, hey, when we've got a new developer asking, hey, I want to create a new library. And it's like, okay, what do you want to put in that library? Well, I want to put in production data. Now we're able to ask, better questions like, hey, is this data sensitive? Meaning, does it have personal information in it that maybe we need to worry about from an audit standpoint? Do you need all of the data? If this file's the biggest file on my system, am I going to be bringing over that entire file, which means that now I've got duplicate objects, with the same file name. So you're right on with that, Greg. I mean, compliance, it was a big thing that now we're compliant, across the board with some of those things.
Perfect. If you next question here, if you could monitor anything to catch early growth, what would it be? What would they be, and why?
So what I would do is I did two things. I did this on a daily basis, and it was a manual task. I mean, I think I wrote some code to kind of do this, and I understand not everybody knows how to program and whatever, but I would go in every day and I would type in work sys status, the command work sys status, and I would look at what's my disk percentage and what's my what's temporary storage. What is that set at? And 99% of the time, I didn't have to worry about it, right? I didn't have to worry about issues. I didn't have to worry about it. And those were two simple things. But it's that one time when it's a Friday afternoon and you're headed out on vacation or something where all of a sudden, you get the serious storage, the critical storage, the CPF 0907, where you're in react mode. So I got into a routine of checking those two things on a daily basis. And then I was, kind of writing those down. So if I could see a little bit in growth with the disk percentage or temporary storage, then I would start maybe doing a little analyzing to kind of figure out what's going on in the system. Is our libraries getting bigger? Is there a directory getting bigger? Things like that.
Yeah. And a lot of times, I know we do this internally here. We actually set up the collections and stuff like that with the alerts and stuff on there to be able to catch some of that growth, so we know before it becomes a problem here as well.
Yeah, and that's one thing too. Robot Space can do that for you automatically, right? Robot Space, you put those things in there. And I know we're going to do a webinar and a demo on some of this stuff down the road, but when you start putting those things into something like Robot Space, you don't have to manually do it. You're kind of in that proactive mode. I'm setting things up where if something happens, I'm going to be alerted way ahead of time that I have an issue. And that's what I like about it. I don't have to manually do any of these things. Robot
Yeah.
Space can do it for me.
Yeah. Perfect. When storage starts, creeping up, what are some of the culprits that you look at first?
Um, so there were three things that I always did, and I'll share some horror stories with you. Um, I would do three things every single time. And again, this is just me, and this helped me out tremendously. The first thing that I would do is I would always run this command called retrieve disk info. Now I know that there are some IBM SQL services out there that you can run, but for me it was running retrieve disk info. And then once that command ran successfully, then you could run the print disk info, and that would help me determine what the biggest libraries were on my system. And what I would do with that is there was a column on the print disk info report that would show me the last use date, the last change date. And that'd give me an idea of are these libraries even being used? And if they were, then I could drill down and start looking at the objects. Okay. The objects in each library to see, if they're being used or not. So that was the first thing that I always did when somebody had an issue with storage. The second thing that I always did is I always looked at out queues. So just type in a workout queue command, go out and look. Um, I started doing that a few years back. I got a call from a customer 2 o'clock in the morning, and hey, we've hit serious storage condition. We're not sure what to do. Can you help us out? I go out in the system and you do workout queue, and they've got 750,000 spool files in an out queue. And I'm thinking, okay, that's probably not normal. And sure enough, down the road, we're looking at it, we're kind of troubleshooting, and we determined that they had a job that was they had jobs that were submitting to batch, and what they were doing is they were generating a log every single time. Well, what they didn't bother to tell me is they had 10 of these jobs submitting every 10 seconds that were generating logs. So, in the period of a minute, you've got you've got there are hours, you've got thousands of spool files. And I've seen that with a couple different customers, and that's why I always check that. Now, the third thing that I do, and I've seen it a couple times, is if you've got security auditing turned on, right? Because a lot of people will have that turned on if they're doing logical replication, or if you've got to create audit reports for customers to show auditors that you're actually checking the system. What some people that I've run into, what they don't do is they don't bother to have a cleanup for those security audit journal receivers. And the story I'll share with you is we had a customer a couple years ago that was they're at like eight terabytes, and they called us and said, hey, can we add more disk? We're running out of disk space. And so we add disk, and then 4 months later they say, hey, can we add more disk? And we add more disk. And then the third time I started doing some security for them, and they wanted to add more disk, and they asked my opinion, and I said, can we just kind of check on the system? I wanted to check. And sure enough, I went out and if you do a work journal or work journ a command and then put in q odd journ F15 will show you all the receivers. And come to find out, they had journal receivers from 4 years ago, and it was eating 4 terabytes of their system. And they had configured some of the settings wrong for the auditors. They had some things set up that they didn't need for replication, and they didn't need for auditing. And so because they had set it up in the one culprit, I think you and I talked a little bit about in the webinar, the system value Q odd level, they had star job DTA turned on, which was capturing every start and stop of jobs hitting the system. And I think they used some software like JD Edwards or something like that, which was creating, it was just a busy system. And as a result, it created a lot of journal receivers, and they filled up quickly, but they didn't have a method in there to clean those off the system. So retrieve disk info, looking at out queues, and looking at journal receivers with QOD those three things are what I like to start with when I was looking for the culprit of why storage is creeping up percentage-wise.
Perfect. And Bob, one last quick question from you. Knowing and taking this in consideration, right? Budgets are always concerned, with customers and stuff like that. But if you had to recommend sort of your hit list, right? What's the most impactful solutions customers should have on their systems to help manage, and also not just manage, but also secure them? What would they be?
So here is where, as a system admin, I'll throw this out here. A lot of people are worried about cost, and I get that, right? Hey, we don't want to spend a lot of money, this and that. But the question that people should be asking is, what is the cost for downtime? For example, if I've got a serious storage condition may exist, and you're down troubleshooting, because what happens is that when this message comes up, the communications starts stopping things, right? People can't get to the system, and technically your system might be down. Maybe you've got some outside users that can no longer get on the system, do FTP, do some of those things. So, you really need to ask yourself, how much money do you lose an hour when your system is down, meaning that you can't connect to it and do work. So that's where I like Robot Space. This software pays for itself. If I was a system admin and I knew nothing about doing some of the things that I know how to do, this is definitely a piece of software I would use. Now, some of the reasons why we talked about proactive versus reactive in Robot Space. You can actually set up some of the thresholds. So let's say your disk percentage is 50%. You could set up 3 thresholds to say, hey, maybe at 60, 70, 80, I want to be alerted that there's an issue. I'm being proactive. I want to know that maybe I've got a certain percentage of growth in an hour. I can set that up, again, being proactive. I can also look and see which jobs are impacting the temporary storage. And again, I can set that up so I'm proactive. I don't have to be doing manual things all the time. Now, the other thing is, I talked about out queues. You can set things up to check your out queues, once a day, once a week, whatever, and you can be alerted to that stuff. So you're being proactive. Now, one of the commands that I absolutely love to run, and it was a pain to do it, but it had a lot of great information, was the retrieve disk info command. And instead of running that manually, now in Robot Space, you can set up something called collections. So I used to think retrieve disk info was a great thing to take a point in time of what the system looks like. With collections, you take that point of time, daily, weekly, whatever, and now what you can do is you can do comparisons to say, hey, I want to compare my libraries. I want to look at the size of my libraries from last week to this week, last month to this month. I want to look at the size of my objects. So when all of a sudden you get alerted that, hey, I've exceeded a threshold, I've crossed a threshold, or I've got some growth, you can start looking at some of those collections, and it'll tell you right away, hey, I've got an issue with the IFS. I've got an issue with maybe a library or something like that. The other thing that I love about Robot Space is some of the auditing. So there's some audits in there, which I would have let. So some of the things that I would do on a quarterly basis, and I'd have to manually do it, right? I have to write some code to do this stuff, is I was always looking at a way to look at my production files, and I'd have to manually reorg some files, meaning that if I could compress some of the deleted records in some of these files, I could make them smaller, which means that after compressing them, I'm freeing up disk space. I can do that in Robot Space, and I can do it in audit jobs. So I would check developer libraries, maybe quarterly. I can do that automatically with audits. So I can say, hey, I want to run these audits and I want to look at all of my programmer libraries. And now I can look and see, hey, which things haven't been used in X number of days or months, and I can get reports on that. So I'm I'm being proactive. I'm letting
Mhm.
the software Robot Space kind of handle some of those things for me, and that's would be the most impactful thing as a system admin that I could do.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to I'm going back to something you said earlier, is how much downtime is acceptable, for the business, right? So that's one of the things that you're actually going to be on one of the topics here later on here in another podcast where we're going to talk about RTO and RPO from that standpoint when we talk about HA. So how much is, how much how much is the business willing to put themselves at risk, right? So being more proactive in these cases, having solutions that are proactive instead of reactive is going to save organizations technically money, as they go forward.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
Perfect. That's great. Yeah, so Bob, I want to thank you for joining me here today and having this conversation. I think there was some a great value from what you offered here today. And I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing the perspective, in the real world scenario and bringing your experiences into it. I mean, I think that's key, right? To a lot of the stuff that we deal with on a daily basis is the real world experience stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think it was incredibly valuable to the listeners here today. So Bob, again, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Greg.
Now, if you want to learn more about proactive monitoring, trending, and repeatable cleanup routines, reach out to the Power team here at Fortra, or you can send me an email, and my email address is greg.schmidt@fortra.com. It'll also be in the show notes. We'll also include in the show notes the link to a more in-depth webinar that Bob and I did recently on the same identical topic, where Bob goes more in depth into some of his findings and experiences he's ran into. And also, don't forget to subscribe, rate the show, and share with the team or others in the IBMI community that might be able to take advantage of some of this information. Thanks for listening, and until next time, unleash the power.